All right, we're ready to create our custom component that will submit our order to an API. So I'm going to create a new Python file within the component folder, and I will call it submit.py. I'm going to copy over the code from the tutorial page. Now, what we're seeing here is just a sort of a dummy component. You'll notice that the actual HTTP call is commented out. That's because we don't actually have an API in place for handling pizza orders. This is just to give you an idea of how a component should be laid out. So there's some important things here. We're using a Python 3 data class. So we've specified some information here that needs to be included in the flow. So if we go back to order, you'll see here we specify the component, and here are the 6 pieces of information that the component needs. So again, we could specify that these are optional, but in this case, they're all mandatory. Then we turn that into a dictionary, and then we submit it in our API call. Now, in this case, because our API doesn't actually exist, all I'm doing is returning a successful result no matter what happens. Another important thing to note is that we are overriding the start method. So all components should override the start method. It's basically the entry point for your component. You can have other methods and properties in here as well if you need it, but just make sure that you do override the start method. And the start method will return a list of entries. And if you don't know what entries are, take a look at that in our documentation or our reference. We have probably over 100 or 200 different types of entries you can create. And in addition to that, you can specify data that should be placed on flow scope. So it's very common for components to return a result value. So if you look at get user info, for example, the ask component returns the result to flow.result, and then we use the flow set component to move that value from flow.result to flow.payment method. So check out our documentation for more information on how to create custom components, but this should give you a rough idea of how it works. So back in our order flow, after the component runs, we check the result. If it's a success, then we say your order was submitted and will be delivered at this time. If it was not successful, we'll issue a message and tell the user to call and place their order. In this case, because our component always returns a successful result, it's always going to issue this message.